Hello guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Zafar. In the last session we talked about the software architecture, that basically there are two levels of the architecture. First is the high level and the second is the low level. And I basically in the last session talked generally about these two types of the architectures in the software industry, right? And today I want to talk a little bit more about the low-level architecture, basically discuss its types, right? And how the low-level architecture is going to look in a little bit more complex logic. All right, let me basically share my screen and start with the explanation of the low-level architecture. So the first type, like not the first type, but the low-level architecture uh, contains in itself three layers. Basically, there are three layers of the low-level architecture, right? So the first layer is exposure, right? Or the controller. Usually in the code base, we call it a controller. This is the exposure, right? So the exposure is basically the entry point of the system, right? The responsibilities of the exposure is receiving requests, calling the service, right? And returning the response. Basically, that's all. These three simple responsibilities that our controller or the exposure does. What it shouldn't do though, shouldn't contain any business logic, right? Because the business logic is for the service to handle, right? Because our service um, is the brain of our system, right? All right. The second thing what it shouldn't do is talk directly to the database, talk directly to the external systems, because again, this is not uh, this is this is something what broker does, not the controller. And the third thing, definitely, it shouldn't do any calculations, any logic in it, right? Again, because this is for the service. Well, the exposure is clear. Basically, in the code base, we call it a controller, right? It's a simple method. It can be paused, it can be get, or can be delete, right? Which receives a request and basically passes it to the service. And whenever the service responds back, the controller the same way responds back with the response. All right. The second The second layer is the service itself. Second layer is the service. So the service is basically, as I told, this is the brain of the application, right? The service is the brain of the application. So we can say that the services contain like the business behaviors, right? The complex logic are usually set in at the service layer. For example, it can be rules, it can be validations, exception handlings, transformations, or like the workflows, right? This is the service. And the third layer is the broker. The third layer is the broker. The broker, the broker layer, so basically the brokers are responsible for talking to external systems, right? We don't let the service or the controller talk to the external service. For that, we have the broker, which basically does that. Example, it can be a database, right? Here we have an example of the brokers. We may have a storage broker, right, which talks to the database, right? Or authentication broker, which talks to the authentication system, right? For a user to be authenticated, for our system to be able to support the authentication flow, right? Or it can be even the blob storage broker, right? Basically, cloud storage for storing images or videos or other files, basically in the cloud storage, right? In order for our application to be able to communicate with the external systems, we need to have a broker, right? We don't basically allow the external systems, right, to go inside our business logic, right, to destroy our business logic. For that, we have the broker. So basically, this is the responsibility of the broker. And the most important thing that the brokers shouldn't contain any business logic, right? Because we don't test the brokers. The brokers are basically just going to talk to the external systems and give us the value from them, right? And then the service here is going to take the value and probably map it, right, to the local model, local value, and basically continue the another logic, right? So here we can see that the service doesn't go and talk to the database directly, right? We have for it a broker. All right, basically the broker level and the exposure level, I think it's very straightforward. It's very clear. And these two layers, they don't require, like, we don't have logic in them, right? We don't, like, basically test them. And it's not a very big deal, right? Because this is mostly just, for example, for the exposure, talk to the service, right? For the broker, just talk to the external system and give me what it gives back, right? And the main logic, the behavior, the important, like the core behavior is going to be here at the service layer. Here I wanna say that since the service layer is going to contain a lot of complex behavior in it. So we basically have types of the services, right? We cannot have one service doing everything. So that's why we split the services, we categorize them into multiple types. So the first type is called the foundation service. Let me basically come here. Okay, the first service type is the foundation. Foundation. Foundation service. Foundation service is basically, like, I would say, the simplest service which talks to the broker, to a broker. The responsibility of this foundation service is just to make sure that it's calling the broker and returning the same value which the broker returns. Of if the value of the broker is not the local, map to the local, for example, to the local model and return, right? Very straightforward. This is the foundation service. It can be, let me give you an example. For example, let's say user foundation, or we don't say the foundation since this is the foundation. This is the first service. We just say user service, right? User service. Okay. So this is the first type, the first category, right, of a service. This is the foundation which just talks to the broker. Let me add here a broker, right? For example, user storage broker, right? All right. And the user storage broker is definitely going to talk to the database. Let me make it like this. Okay. The second uh, type, or the second category, is a processing service, right? The the processing service is the service which is going to contain, like, a very complex logic, right? So if the foundation just talks to the broker and returns the value, the processing service is going to take care of the logic. It can be looping, right? It can be the calculations. It can be even some complex mappings, for example, or even the decision makings, right? So this is for the processing services. They contain heavier business logic, right? So the second is the processing service. The processing services, they may just exist without talking to any service. Usually the processing services, they talk to the foundation services, right? They cannot talk directly to the broker because uh, the foundation service talks to the broker. The responsibility of the foundation service is talk to the broker, right? So the processing cannot come here and just directly talk to the broker like this, right? The responsibility of the processing service is basically make sure that the heavy logic is taken care of in it. It can talk to a foundation service. It can talk, for example, to the user service, or it may not talk to anything. It may have just something, some complex calculations in it, right? For example, we have a, let's say, user calculation or a processing service which takes some numbers and does some logic, right? Some calculations, some mathematical calculations, and basically returns the value. Or the processing service may talk to the user service, right? And do some looping, right? For example, let's say there is a retrieve all user retrieve all user method, which is coming from the user service, right? The processing service is basically, let me give you an example here. Okay, we have a user processing service, right? Which is basically going to, let's say, uh, retrieve users by group ID, for example, right? We have a method in here called retrieve users by group ID. Why this method is going to sit under the processing? Because we are going to do the looping, right? We are going to have a higher business logic, right? We will need to retrieve all users, call the retrieve all users method from the foundation service, and basically then in the processing itself do the logic. Okay, retrieve all the users where the user dot group ID equal the incoming group ID, right? So basically, this is the responsibility of the processing service to take care of uh, heavier business logic, right? And the processing services can talk directly to a foundation service, right? All right. The third category, the third type is called orchestration service. Orchestration services. All right. Orchestrations. If you ask me why do we need this orchestration service? We need the orchestration services for being able to orchestrate multiple services, right? So let's say if we have a very complex logic in our system and we want to call multiple services and make sure that we have one logic talking to multiple services, in that case, we are going to require this orchestration service, right? Let me fix this quickly. Okay. All right. Again, for example, it can be a user orchestration service, or let me give you a different example. It can be a user email, right? Orchestration service, right? User email orchestration service. Why email? Probably because, let me give you an example. We want to do an absorption for a user, and after the absorption happens, right, we want to send the email. So you can see that we have two logics in here, right? First, do the absort for a user. So check if the user exists, modify the user. If the user doesn't exist, right, basically add the user, and at the end send the email that the user was modified or the user was added, right? So we can see here that our system requires two calls, right? We need to make two calls, right? We need to call two flows, basically call the user flow and then later on call the email flow. So in this case, we definitely are going to require to have an orchestration service, which is going to talk, let's say, to a user processing service, right? In order to add or modify the user. And then one more service in here, which is basically the email, right? the email processing service. The email processing service. All right. The most like one more one important thing I wanted to mention here, that the orchestration service should talk to the same type of the service. It cannot talk to the processing and like in the same service, like in the same logic, talk to the foundation. Like basically, the orchestration service cannot talk to two different types of the services. It should talk. It needs to talk only to one type. It can be the foundation or it can be the processing. So let's say if we have the user processing service, right? Why? Because the user processing service has some logic and we need that logic for our orchestration service. We will need to create, basically do the pass-through for the email service to make it email processing service. So we balance the architecture. So our architecture is not unbalanced, right? All right. These are basically the types, the layers of the service. As you can see, we may have a foundation service, right? Processing service, orchestration service. And all of these like depends like on our logic, on our application, right? If our logic requires us to have the processing, we will definitely need to implement the processing. We don't put the everything in the foundation, right? If our logic requires the orchestration, if we need to do some orchestration work, definitely we will need to create the orchestration service, right? And make sure that the orchestration talks to the same level of the services, right? Of processing or the foundations. And one more thing, the orchestration service cannot talk to more than 3 services, right? So we don't overload our orchestration service. We don't make it a very big, massive service. No, we have a limit, 3 services, right? And the orchestration service is more than one and not more than 3. Uh, Basically, this is regarding the services, right? Overall, like this is the most important thing to know regarding the low-level architecture, that we have the exposure, right? The exposure is basically, this is the entry point of the system, right? It receives the request and it returns the response from the service. Then we have the service, right, which handles like the business logic, the business behavior, right? This is the brain of our application, is the service itself, right? And here we have the brokers, basically talking to the external systems and not letting the external systems come to our business logic, right? To influence our business logic. If I would give you an example of a restaurant, let me give you an example. We have a restaurant, right? So let's imagine like the exposure is the waiter which goes and takes the order from the clients, right? This is the exposure. The service is the kitchen, right? Where is the whole logic happens, like cooking, like making the salads, making sure that the taste is delicious. We have all species added, right? And the broker is basically the delivery, which basically delivers to our kitchen uh, the groceries from like external markets, right? External clients like basically deliver uh, like basically the groceries, for example, right? So we don't let them directly go to the service, right? So there is a layer between the kitchen and between the external clients, which basically receives the groceries, receives the products. So basically, this is the broker, right? Very simple. I would like to give you an example, like to show you how the low-level architecture looks with a quite like not very complex but heavy logic, right? Let me show you a workflow in here. We have a flow chart, and let's say, as I told before, our system needs to assert a user, like check if the user basically exists, modify the user, right? If user doesn't exist, add the user, and at the end, send email in both cases. In the current flowchart, you can see we have the input user, and here's the condition, right? Here's the if statement. Does user exist, right? Okay, if the user exists, go modify user and send user email and end, right? Does user exist? No. If the user doesn't exist, add the user, send the email. Okay, how would we implement this in the low-level architecture if we want to design, if we want to start building the code, right? And make this logic work in our system, right? Okay, let me show you. This is the ready architecture I built for you. I can walk you through it very quickly. So this is the how it looks, the overview of the architecture, right? It may look very complex and like not clear what's going on, but I hope that when after that I explain, right, it's going to be very clear and very simple for you. And when we have this kind of architecture, it's going to be very easy and straightforward to go and write the code. All right, we have in here the user controller, right? What is the user controller? User's controller? User's controller is basically our exposure, right? Is our exposure. Let me color it with the blue, right? So the user's controller has um, uh, HTTP method, which is the Upsert, the URL, right? Input, the user is gonna come to this. So basically this user's controller accepts a user and the method name Upsert user and send email. And the output is basically the user, right? The Upserted user eventually. And this user's controller is talking, as you can see, to the user email orchestration service, right? It doesn't talk to any brokers. It doesn't talk to um, any external sources, right? So it talks to the user email orchestration service. So basically, the user email orchestration service is our service in here, right? Basically, this is where the heavier logic, right, is going to happen. This is basically the brain of our application, right? Let me mark it as a green. So why orchestration? Probably we have more than like one flow, right? Let's check it. Yes, as you can see, we have two processing services in here. And this orchestration service talks to two of them, right? Why? Because we have to make we have to basically uh, implement two logics. First, add or modify the user, and the second, send the email. As you can see at the top, the first thing the user email orchestration service does is calling user processing service, right? Which has Upsert user async method in it. Why processing? Why not foundation? Right? Because Upsert is not something just straightforward as add, right? We don't just call directly the storage broker to make the Upsert because the Upsert contains three logics in it, three main things. Let me explain. Okay, the user processing service is talking to the user service, right? Which has three methods. First, the retrieve user by ID. The second, add user async, right? And the third is modify user async. So we have three methods under the foundation service, right? Which talk to the storage broker, right? So it's basically we can say simple CRUD operations, right? So for us to be able to do the Upsert, we will need the retrieve. Why? Because first we want to know if the user exists, right? So what was the condition here? Does user exist? Okay, how do we know that? We definitely need to call the retrieve user by ID, right? So we need to call the retrieve user by ID. When we have the user, right? When we have that response user, it can be null or it can be a user from the database. Here in the processing service, we do like this condition work. We do the if statement work, right? Which is the heavy logic. We cannot put it directly to the foundation service, right? So when we have the user, right, coming back, we can check, okay, if this user is null, if the user exists, right? Or if the user doesn't exist, go add the user, right? But if the user does exist, if this retrieve user by ID returns as the user which exists, an existing user, right? Then we go and modify, right? We go and modify. So this is our first logic. As you can see, the processing service currently is doing three things, like I would say in the same method, right? Go first, retrieve the user by ID. The second, check if that retrieved user is null. If it's null, go add the user. If it's not null, modify it. So this is the work of the processing, as I told you before, right? To do the like heavier logic, not to let the foundation to do everything, right? Talking to the broker and also making sure that all of this absorption happens. No, we separate them and make sure that our system is clear, is solid, and is easy to understand, even for the beginners. All right. Well, when we absorted the user, what is the second thing? Go, right, and send the user email. Go and send the user email basically uh, on the absorption. Here is very straightforward. We have this flow, user email, email processing service, email broker, just to send the email, right? Uh, why processing service in here? Just in order to make our architecture balance. Yes, probably there is not complex logic is happening. This processing is just calling the email service. But since our orchestration cannot talk like to two different types of the services like processing and the foundations, we need to balance the architecture by doing the pass-through, right? Bringing email processing service here. All right, this is the service level. As you can see, we already marked it as a green, right? Already marked it as a green. And the last layer, as you can see, this is the brokers. User storage broker, which talks to the user's database, right? It has all these CRUD methods, CRUD operations. Very straightforward, right? No logic is in here. And the email broker, which is talking to the email uh, provider, basically, which sends the emails, right? Based on our configuration. This is it. As you can see, we have the exposure, we have the service, and we have the broker. And the same thing in here, the exposure, the blue, the service, the brain of the application is the green, and this red is the storage, is basically the brokers which talk to external systems, right? Database, the email provider, and other, and so on. All right, I think it's very clear now. At the beginning, it might look uh, not clear and maybe too many boxes, too many things I don't understand. But when you actually learn all these layers, right, and you understand that there are some types of the categories of the services, right? There are more actually, more than these three, but this is like the most important things. And that there is a broker, right, which talks to external systems. It's going to be very easy for you to understand. And even when you have a task, right, coming from your boss or from a senior, they come and say, I want this to be implemented, right? The absorption of the user, and send the email, and they give you just the flow chart. They explain to you. You can basically go and simply implement what we've learned today, right? Go and build this beautiful architecture, which is going to make your code writing very easy, because you are not confused and you like don't go back to the flow chart and think, okay, what should I write first, right? You have everything in here, right? And you can just basically go and start from the broker simply. Implement the brokers, implement the foundations, implement the processing, and then at the end basically do your orchestration job and expose it from the controller, and that's it. All right, for today this is all. I hope it was clear and it was easy for you to understand, and I hope that now you have like basic knowledge of the low-level architecture, and hopefully this knowledge that I shared can uh, make like it easy for you to write the code, and probably you can also share with others. Thank you very much for your time. See you next time.